The ballroom shimmered with opulence, every corner reflecting the brilliance of chandeliers that rained golden light across marble floors polished to a mirror shine. Waiters in crisp white jackets floated effortlessly through the crowd, balancing trays of champagne flutes that sparkled like liquid diamonds under the glow. Laughter rippled from clusters of socialites in couture gowns, their sequins and silk catching the light with every graceful movement. It was the night of the year, the annual charity gala hosted by Alexander Grant, the city's most admired millionaire, a man whose name was synonymous with both fortune and philanthropy. Cameras flashed in bursts as reporters lined the velvet ropes, eager to capture the glittering display of wealth and power gathered under one roof. Alexander stood at the center of it all, tall and commanding in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, the very image of success. His smile was polished, practiced, and endlessly charming. To the world, he was not just a businessman, but a pillar of the community, a devoted husband, and soon-to-be father. Guests clinked glasses in his honor, speaking of his generosity in funding hospitals, schools, and countless charities. Every handshake, every toast, every camera angle seemed to reinforce the portrait of a man whose life was nothing short of perfect. At his side stood Evelyn, his wife, radiant in an emerald green gown that draped over her growing belly. The delicate way she carried herself, head high, eyes soft, a hand resting protectively over her child, commanded admiration from everyone in the room. She was known for her kindness, her quiet grace, and her unwavering support of her husband's empire. Yet behind the poised smile she offered the crowd, there lingered a shadow. Her gaze often drifted when she thought no one was watching, her fingers tightening around her glass a little too firmly, as though clinging to invisible cracks forming beneath the glitter of her life. As the orchestra's melody floated through the air and photographers captured the picture-perfect couple, whispers of admiration filled the ballroom. Still, beneath the polished surface of champagne and diamonds, a tension lingered, subtle yet unmistakable. The night promised glamour, but it also held something far more dangerous, waiting just beyond the shimmer of the chandeliers. Evelyn could feel it in the stillness between her husband's glances, in the silence that stretched whenever their eyes met. Something was about to change, and when it did, the flawless image of Alexander Grant's life would never look the same again. By all appearances, Alexander Grant was untouchable. His name was printed in glossy magazines, his face graced the covers of business journals, and his speeches at charity events were quoted like gospel among the city's elite. People saw him as the embodiment of loyalty, loyal to his family, his business, and his community. To the outside world, he was the rare blend of wealth and humility, a man who had it all and somehow managed to give even more back. Yet the truth, hidden carefully beneath layers of charm and reputation, was far more complicated. In hushed corners of the gala, where champagne loosened tongues and shadows shielded bold whispers, not everyone spoke of Alexander with reverence. Some guests remembered stories too conveniently buried, rumors of late-night encounters and unexplained absences, tales of a man who thrived on power not only in boardrooms but also in matters of the heart. His public persona was polished to perfection, but those who looked closer saw cracks beginning to show. Whispers slipped like smoke between the glittering gowns and tuxedos, faint but growing louder, daring to challenge the perfect picture. And at the heart of these whispers was one name, Isabella Hart. She entered Alexander's life as a rising figure in the fashion world, ambitious and relentless, her beauty matched only by her hunger to climb. To the untrained eye, she was just another guest tonight, draped in a scarlet gown that commanded attention and envy alike. But those who had been watching knew better. Isabella was no stranger to Alexander's side. She had appeared too many times in places where Evelyn could not follow. Isabella's presence was both intoxicating and dangerous. She carried herself with a kind of confidence that dared anyone to question her place in the room. Yet, beneath her flawless exterior, envy simmered. She knew she could never completely eclipse Evelyn, the adored wife, the expectant mother, the woman who wore Alexander's ring and carried his child. That reality stung like a blade, sharpening her determination to be more than just a hidden secret in his glamorous world. As the night unfolded, guests exchanged subtle glances, their conversations laced with innuendo. A socialite with too much champagne leaned toward her friend, whispering about the woman in red, who seemed far too familiar with the host. Another murmured that Alexander's gaze lingered just a moment too long when it drifted across the crowd. Eyes darted toward Isabella, then to Evelyn, then back again, weaving invisible threads of speculation. Every smile Alexander offered his wife was scrutinized, every laugh shared with Isabella dissected in silence. The facade was holding, but only barely. Beneath the glitter and glamour, the tension thickened, a storm gathering force behind carefully closed doors. Guests might have been too polite to say it aloud, but many could sense what was about to erupt, that tonight would mark the moment when the perfect image of Alexander Grant could no longer survive. The grand double doors of the ballroom opened, and in she walked, as though the night itself had been waiting for her. Isabella Hart did not simply enter a room, she conquered it. Draped in a crimson silk gown that hugged every curve with ruthless precision, she moved with a rhythm that silenced conversations mid-sentence. The fabric shimmered like fire under the chandeliers, and with each step, heads turned, cameras clicked, and whispers surged like an incoming tide. She was breathtaking, and she knew it. A hush rippled briefly across the gala as photographers adjusted their lenses, desperate to capture her arrival. Her jet-black hair cascaded in perfect waves over her shoulders, and diamonds glittered at her ears, catching the light with every tilt of her head. Her smile, sharp, daring, almost taunting, was designed not to charm everyone but to challenge them. The message was clear: she belonged in the spotlight, whether the world welcomed her or not. Guests exchanged glances, curiosity mingling with discomfort. Isabella wasn't merely beautiful, she was dangerous in her beauty. She didn't blend into the glittering sea of gowns, she disrupted it. A woman at the far end of the room leaned into her companion and whispered, "That's her," as if identifying a predator among prey. Another shook her head, muttering, "How bold of her to show up here." Rumors had circulated for months, but seeing Isabella step so confidently into Alexander Grant's carefully curated world made the whispers feel tangible, undeniable. Across the room, Evelyn stood like a portrait of grace, her emerald gown a stark contrast to Isabella's blazing red. While Evelyn carried an aura of quiet dignity, her beauty understated yet luminous, Isabella radiated defiance and seduction. Evelyn's hand rested gently on her swollen belly, the ultimate symbol of loyalty and love, but Isabella's entrance screamed of conquest, a challenge thrown across the ballroom floor. The contrast was painful to witness. Two women tethered to the same man, yet worlds apart in how they carried their roles. From the moment Isabella entered, her eyes found Alexander. The way she looked at him, unflinching, hungry, unashamed, was impossible to ignore. And Alexander, despite his years of practice in controlling his image, faltered. His gaze lingered on her just a second too long, his lips twitching in an almost imperceptible smile. It was enough. Those who noticed exchanged knowing looks, their suspicions confirmed. Isabella did not hesitate to close the distance between them. With calculated poise, she navigated through the sea of guests, her gown sweeping like a flame behind her. She positioned herself dangerously close, close enough that conversations around them faltered, close enough that Evelyn, from across the room, could see the magnetic pull unfolding before her eyes. It was no accident. Isabella thrived on spectacle, on pushing boundaries, on daring the world to judge her. The gala had begun as a night of celebration, but with Isabella's arrival, it shifted. Beneath the glitter and applause, a new energy pulsed through the room, charged, volatile, and threatening to ignite at any moment. The evening reached its glittering peak with the orchestra swelling into a triumphant melody and the master of ceremonies announcing yet another record-breaking donation by Alexander Grant. Guests rose from their seats in applause, their hands clapping in rhythm to the music, their cheers echoing across the ballroom. Cameras flashed like lightning storms, immortalizing the moment where Alexander stood at the center of admiration, Evelyn glowing at his side. It was meant to be the highlight of the night, the moment his reputation soared higher than ever. But then, in a heartbeat, everything changed. As the applause lingered, Isabella moved closer, her crimson gown brushing against his sleeve. For a split second, the crowd thought she was simply congratulating him. She leaned in with that intoxicating smile, eyes glittering with challenge. And then, before anyone could stop it, Alexander bent his head toward her and kissed her. Not a fleeting kiss of politeness, not an ambiguous brush of lips, but a lingering, deliberate kiss that left no room for doubt. The ballroom froze. The applause died mid-clap, hanging in the air like a broken echo. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Sharp intakes of breath, muffled cries of disbelief, the clatter of a dropped glass somewhere in the distance. 100 eyes widened in unison, and the silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the frantic clicking of cameras capturing the scandal in real time. Evelyn stood frozen, her emerald gown suddenly feeling heavier, suffocating against her skin. The scene unfolded before her like a nightmare she could not wake from. The man she had trusted, the man whose child she carried, had just shattered her dignity in front of the very world that once admired them. Her chest tightened, breath catching as a storm raged inside her. Shock, rage, sorrow, and humiliation colliding so violently that she could barely remain standing. Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach, cradling the life within her, as if shielding the child from the ugliness of the betrayal. Around her, guests reacted in fragmented ways. Some turned their heads away, pretending not to see, unwilling to be caught staring at such an intimate scandal. Others whispered furiously behind jeweled hands, their eyes darting between Evelyn's pale face and the brazen pair still at the center of attention. A few, less discreet, raised their phones, capturing the kiss that would soon flood tabloids and social media feeds. Each flash of a camera was a dagger to Evelyn's heart, the betrayal immortalized forever. Alexander, perhaps realizing the weight of his action only after it was too late, pulled back, but the damage was irreversible. The silence pressed in on him, thick and suffocating, every eye judging, every whisper cutting deeper. Isabella, on the other hand, reveled in the moment. She tilted her head, her smile curling with satisfaction, as if she had won a battle Evelyn hadn't even known was being fought. The betrayal became unforgettable, not just because of the kiss itself, but because of its public nature. This was not whispered gossip, not a rumor that could be denied or buried. It was a spectacle, a humiliation delivered under chandeliers and flashing cameras, in front of hundreds of witnesses. Evelyn's life, once polished and pristine, had cracked open in the most brutal way possible. As she stood there, trembling but unbroken, one truth settled heavy in her chest: nothing would ever be the same again. Evelyn's world seemed to collapse inward the moment Alexander's lips touched Isabella's. The music of the orchestra faded to nothing, the chatter of guests melted into silence, and even the chandeliers above lost their sparkle in her eyes. All she could see was him, her husband, the man she had once trusted more than anyone, holding another woman in the very place where she should have been cherished. Her throat tightened, her body trembling, and for a terrifying second, she thought her legs might give way beneath her. Her hand instinctively clutched her swollen belly, the child within her kicking faintly, as if responding to the storm raging inside her. That small movement cut through her haze of despair like a blade of clarity. This was not just her pain anymore, it was their child's future. Her humiliation was not something she could simply swallow and bury. It had been carved into the night for all to see. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Anger began to coil inside her, burning hotter with every passing second. How dare he? How dare he shatter the life they had built, the promises he had whispered, the dreams they had nurtured together, and do it so brazenly in front of the world? The betrayal was not quiet, not hidden. It was a declaration, and it mocked everything she had ever given him. The humiliation twisted deeper as she caught the stares of the guests. Some looked at her with pity, others with morbid curiosity, and a few with poorly hidden glee, as though they had been waiting for the pedestal to crumble beneath her. Whispers rippled across the room, their voices like knives. How could he? She looks devastated. Did she know all along? Evelyn felt her heart pounding in her ears, her face flushing with heat, but beneath it all was a growing, unshakable resolve. 4 years, she had been silent, the picture-perfect wife, supportive, graceful, loyal. She had swallowed her suspicions, ignored the faint signs, trusted his words even when his actions made her doubt. But tonight was different. Tonight, the mask had been ripped away, and everyone had seen the truth. If she stayed silent now, she would become complicit in her own destruction. Her hands shook as she set her glass on the nearest table, the the stem rattling against the polished surface. She drew in a deep breath, squaring her shoulders as her gaze fixed on the stage where Alexander still stood, flustered yet trying to mask his discomfort. Isabella lingered beside him, basking in the attention like a queen who had stolen her crown. The sight ignited a fire within Evelyn, no longer just heartbreak, but fury. Her steps were slow at first, deliberate, as she began to weave through the crowd. People parted instinctively, their murmurs swelling as they realized where she was headed. Each step steadied her, each heartbeat sharpened her resolve. She was not going to shrink into the shadows or flee in tears. No, she would face this betrayal head-on. The microphone, glinting under the stage lights, suddenly became her destination. It called to her like a weapon, a tool through which her silence would end. She imagined her voice ringing out across the room, slicing through the lies and illusions, forcing Alexander to confront what he had done. Not in whispers, not in private, but under the same lights where he had humiliated her. By the time she reached the steps leading to the stage, her trembling had subsided, replaced by a steel she never knew she possessed. She was Evelyn Grant, wife, mother-to-be, and tonight she would no longer be the quiet, obedient figure at her husband's side. Tonight, she would reclaim her voice. The ballroom was still buzzing with fragments of whispers when Evelyn climbed the steps to the stage. Each click of her heels against the polished wood rang louder than the orchestra ever had, cutting through the murmurs and drawing every eye in the room. Alexander stiffened as he saw her approach, his polished smile faltering, his composure unraveling at the edges. Isabella smirked faintly, folding her arms across her chest, confident that Evelyn would retreat in silence, humiliated. But the smirk would not last. Evelyn reached the podium and wrapped her trembling fingers around the microphone. For a moment, her voice caught in her throat. The ballroom waited, breathless. The silence was suffocating, thick with expectation. Then, with a deep breath that seemed to steady her from within, Evelyn spoke. "Good evening, everyone." Her tone was soft at first, but the microphone carried it through every corner of the room. "I know this night was meant to celebrate generosity, compassion, and truth. But I think it's time we speak about another kind of truth, the kind that isn't printed in the programs or plastered across the headlines." Her voice wavered with pain, but underneath it was a growing strength. The audience leaned in, captivated by her courage. Alexander's jaw tightened, his hand half reaching toward her as if to silence her, but he froze under the weight of the crowd's gaze. Evelyn's eyes locked onto him, no longer filled with quiet adoration, but with fire. "For years," she continued, her words slicing through the tension, "I have stood beside this man. I have supported him, loved him, carried his child. I believed in the image he showed the world, the loyal husband, the faithful partner, the man of honor. But tonight, you've all seen the truth for yourselves." A murmur spread across the ballroom. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some nodding in agreement, others glancing nervously at Alexander. Isabella's smile faltered, her confidence cracking as Evelyn's voice grew stronger. "You all saw him kiss another woman, his mistress, without shame, without hesitation, without a single thought for the woman standing right here." Evelyn pressed a hand to her stomach, her voice breaking for a moment before regaining its power. "And not just me, but our unborn child. The family he pretends to cherish." Gasps broke through the silence, followed by a swell of whispers that filled the room like a storm. Isabella's shoulders stiffened, her smugness now replaced with unease. She tried to maintain her poise, but Evelyn's words cut through the armor she had worn so proudly. Evelyn turned her gaze back to the crowd, her voice ringing with a mixture of anguish and strength. "You see, betrayal isn't just a wound, it's a theft. It steals trust, dignity, and the years you've given in love. But tonight, I refuse to let this betrayal define me. I will not stand here as the silent wife in the background of his empire. I am more than his shadow. I am more than his trophy. I am worth respect." The crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in thunderous applause. Some clapped out of admiration, others out of sheer awe at her bravery. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notepads, cameras zoomed in closer, capturing every word, every tear, every ounce of strength in her trembling frame. Alexander's carefully crafted image shattered in real time. His reputation as the devoted husband, the honorable leader, dissolved under the glaring light of his wife's truth. He opened his mouth as if to defend himself, but the sound was drowned by the roar of the room, by the undeniable power of Evelyn's words. She turned one last time to him, her expression no longer broken but resolute. "You built an empire on lies, Alexander. And tonight, it crumbles, not because of me, but because of you." The microphone echoed as she let it fall back onto the stand, her message complete. Evelyn stepped back from the podium, her head high, her hand resting on her belly as if drawing strength from the life she carried. Isabella's eyes darted nervously, her earlier smugness reduced to silence. Alexander stood frozen, drowning in the wreckage of his own making. The ballroom, once filled with glamour and celebration, had transformed into a stage of reckoning. And at the center of it stood Evelyn, not as the betrayed wife, but as a woman who had seized her voice and her power in front of the world. For a long suspended moment after Evelyn's words, the ballroom was wrapped in stunned silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, almost sacred, as though no one dared to breathe too loudly for fear of disturbing the weight of what had just happened. Eyes darted from Evelyn to Alexander, from the trembling microphone to Isabella's stiff frame, and back again. It was as if the glittering chandeliers themselves leaned closer, waiting for the collective exhale of the room. Then, like the crackle of fire catching on dry wood, the whispers began. At first, a murmur here and there, soft voices trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. "Did you hear what she said? She exposed him." And in front of everyone, the whispers grew louder, overlapping, multiplying, until the air buzzed with speculation and shock. Every table, every corner of the gala was alive with hushed conversation, the perfect image of Alexander Grant disintegrating in real time. Some guests clapped, tentatively at first, then with conviction. Their applause rang out in support of Evelyn's bravery, rippling across the room like a wave. Others looked at her with pity, their faces softening as they watched the elegant woman stand tall after such a devastating humiliation. A few, less generous, shook their heads as if scandal was more entertaining than tragic, whispering about how the mighty had finally fallen. But regardless of where they stood, no one could deny that Evelyn's act had shifted the energy of the night forever. The media reporters who had been invited to cover the gala as a charitable celebration now scrambled into action, their pens scratching furiously against notepads, their phones buzzing with hurried messages to editors. Cameras whirred and zoomed, lenses focusing not on Alexander's gleaming trophies or oversized checks, but on Evelyn, her tear-bright eyes, her trembling yet defiant stance, her words echoing still in the charged air. Headlines practically wrote themselves: "Millionaire's empire crumbles at gala scandal." "Pregnant wife confronts cheating husband in shocking speech." "Mistress exposed under spotlight of charity ball." Meanwhile, Alexander stood in the middle of it all, his face drained of its polished confidence. The man who once commanded admiration with a single smile now looked small, cornered, and vulnerable. He tried to force a chuckle, to mask the disaster, but the sound fell flat, swallowed by the storm of murmurs and stares. Isabella shifted uncomfortably beside him, her earlier smugness now burned away by the harsh glares of women who judged her, men who disdained her boldness, and journalists who captured every flicker of her unease. But Evelyn, oh, Evelyn was transformed. To many in that room, she became more than the betrayed wife. She became a symbol of courage, of a woman refusing to be diminished by betrayal. Her defiance sparked admiration, her strength inspired hushed nods and whispers of respect. Guests who once pitied her now looked at her with something else, something closer to awe. In that ballroom, under the unforgiving glare of chandeliers and cameras, a reputation fell, and another was born. Alexander's empire of illusion cracked apart, while Evelyn rose from the rubble, her bravery blazing brighter than any diamond in the room. All eyes turned toward Isabella now, as if the room had collectively realized she was no longer just an accessory in the scandal, she was a centerpiece. The woman who had swept into the gala with fire and confidence now seemed caught in the flames she had fanned. Her crimson gown, once dazzling, suddenly felt too loud, too accusatory under the scrutiny of hundreds of stares. The smug smile she had worn earlier wavered, replaced by a flicker of unease as the applause for Evelyn's bravery echoed in her ears. Isabella straightened her shoulders, refusing to let her composure shatter entirely. She had built her life on the art of performance, of pretending to belong in circles that had once looked down on her. But tonight, the act was faltering. Whispers stabbed at her from every direction. That's the mistress. She ruined their marriage. Doesn't she have any shame? Each word was a dagger, cutting through the armor of her pride. Her mind raced. Did she truly love Alexander, or had she only loved the power he represented? When she first met him, his charm had swept her off her feet, his promises painting her future in gold. He had made her believe she was more than just a fling, that she was the woman who understood him, the woman who would one day stand beside him in the spotlight. She had convinced herself that Evelyn was merely a symbol, a figurehead, while she was the true passion in his life. But now, with Evelyn's voice still echoing in the ballroom, Isabella felt that illusion crumble. She tried to mask her discomfort with a laugh, soft and dismissive, as if to say none of this mattered. "People will always twist things," she murmured to a nearby guest, though her voice lacked conviction. Her eyes darted toward Alexander, seeking reassurance, but his gaze was fixed firmly on the floor, avoiding her altogether. The silence between them was deafening. For the first time, she realized she might not be his chosen one, not the queen she believed herself to be, but simply the weapon he had wielded carelessly in his selfish game. Evelyn's confrontation forced Isabella to look inward, to confront the part she had played. She wasn't an innocent bystander. She had known Alexander was married, known his wife was carrying his child, and still she had chosen to step closer instead of walking away. The weight of that truth pressed against her chest, suffocating. She wanted to defend herself, to declare that she had been misled, that she had loved him, that she had believed in his promises. But in the eyes of the crowd, no justification could erase the image of her lips on another woman's husband. For the first time that night, Isabella felt small. The ballroom that had once seemed to bow to her presence now closed in on her, every glittering chandelier exposing her flaws, every whisper amplifying her shame. She had chased wealth, power, and validation, but all she held now was the bitter taste of humiliation. As Evelyn stood tall, surrounded by respect, Isabella realized that she would always be remembered not as a woman of strength, but as the mistress whose arrogance collapsed under the weight of truth. The fallout was swift and merciless. By the morning after the gala, headlines blazed across newspapers and news sites, each one more damning than the last. Millionaire's double life exposed. Charity gala turns to scandal. Pregnant wife's speech shatters husband's legacy. The kiss, immortalized in crystal-clear photographs, spread across every screen, paired with images of Evelyn at the microphone, her hand over her belly, her eyes filled with both pain and defiance. The story gripped the city, and Alexander Grant's name, once gilded in prestige, became synonymous with betrayal. Business partners began to distance themselves immediately. Calls that once brought opportunities now ended with polite refusals or complete silence. Sponsors pulled their support from his foundations, donors withdrew their pledges, and charities scrambled to sever ties. No one wanted to be associated with the scandal, afraid of the stain it left behind. His empire, so carefully constructed on image and influence, crumbled brick by brick under the weight of public outrage. The boardrooms that had once echoed with admiration for his leadership now filled with questions of integrity. Contracts dissolved, stocks plummeted, and the whispers that had begun in hushed corners of galas now thundered across the city. Alexander, who had built a kingdom on the illusion of loyalty and respect, found himself abandoned, his wealth unable to shield him from the scorn of the world. Evelyn, however, experienced a very different wave. Though she carried wounds that ran deep, humiliation, heartbreak, betrayal, she found herself surrounded by a tide of public sympathy. Letters poured in, messages of support flooding her social media accounts. Women wrote to her, praising her courage, thanking her for giving voice to the pain so many had endured silently. She had become a symbol of resilience, her bravery at the microphone inspiring conversations far beyond the glittering walls of that ballroom. Still, behind the admiration, Evelyn grappled with the questions that would shape her future. Could she ever forgive Alexander? Could she raise their child in a home where trust had been shattered so publicly, so cruelly? Her heart ached with the memory of what they once had. The man she thought he was, the love she believed in. But the fire that had carried her to the stage refused to let her retreat into silence again. Nights were sleepless. She would sit by the window of their mansion, one hand on her stomach, imagining the life ahead. She weighed the options, to stay and fight for the fragments of their marriage, or to walk away and rebuild something new, free of lies. Every glance at her reflection reminded her of the woman she had become. Not weak, not silent, but strong enough to claim her worth. Meanwhile, Alexander retreated into shadows, avoiding cameras, canceling appearances, his once confident stride replaced with a desperate shuffle. He begged her for forgiveness behind closed doors, swearing it had been a mistake, pleading that they could repair what was broken. But Evelyn knew the truth. The betrayal hadn't been a slip. It had been a choice made in the cruelest, most public way imaginable. And so, as the empire collapsed around him, Evelyn began to rise from its ruins. She didn't yet know exactly what path she would take, but she knew one thing with unshakable clarity. Whatever came next, it would be on her terms, not his. The grand ballroom that had once seemed like a palace of glittering dreams now felt to Evelyn like a cage of broken promises. The chandeliers still sparkled, the champagne still flowed, and the music played on, but she no longer belonged to that world of illusions. The echoes of her voice at the microphone still hung in the air, reverberating through every corner of her heart. She had said the words she never thought she'd be brave enough to say. And now, there was nothing left but the truth. With calm deliberation, Evelyn set down her untouched glass on a passing waiter's tray. Her hand lingered over her stomach, feeling the quiet movement of the child within her. The weight of betrayal was heavy, but the presence of new life was heavier still, stronger, anchoring her in ways she hadn't understood until this very moment. She realized that she didn't need Alexander, his empire, or his empty promises to survive. She carried something infinitely more powerful, her dignity, her strength, and a future that belonged to her and her child alone. The guests parted as she moved through the crowd, a mixture of awe and silence following her. Some reached for her hand, offering whispered encouragements. Others simply stared, struck by the regal composure of a woman who had been humiliated yet refused to bow. Every step she took across the marble floor was an act of defiance against the man who had underestimated her, against a society that often expected women to endure in silence. Alexander called her name once, his voice strained and desperate, but she didn't turn back. She had given him years of her life, her loyalty, and her love. In return, he had given her betrayal, unveiled in the cruelest of spotlights. There was no redemption in that moment, no apology strong enough to erase the sting of public disgrace. She had stood by him long enough. Now she was standing for herself. Outside the gala hall, the night air was cool and liberating. The flashing cameras caught her exit, capturing not a woman broken by her husband's infidelity, but a woman transformed by her own courage. Headlines the next day would not only recount Alexander's downfall but also immortalize Evelyn's strength. She was no longer just the wife of a millionaire, she was a symbol of independence, a mother-to-be who had chosen respect over ruin. As she walked toward the waiting car, Evelyn inhaled deeply, feeling the weight lift from her shoulders. The path ahead was uncertain. She would face challenges, raising a child on her own, navigating a life rebuilt from fragments, finding new strength in solitude. But uncertainty no longer frightened her. For the first time in years, her future was hers to shape. Inside the ballroom, Alexander stood in the wreckage of his empire, surrounded by whispers and disdain, left to confront the consequences of his choices. He had everything a man could want, and in one reckless moment, he had lost it all. Evelyn did not need to watch his fall to know it was happening. His ruin was no longer her burden. The car door closed behind her, and as the driver pulled away, Evelyn looked out at the city lights with quiet determination. She was not leaving as a victim but as a woman reborn, carrying with her not just the memory of betrayal, but the unshakable resolve to rise above it. And in the gentle kick of the child within her, she found the promise of a new beginning, one rooted in strength, independence, and the kind of love that could never be shattered.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.